There's no line. 624. This person, is she gonna be online?
No. Yeah.
She's pretty reliable. I think she'll be here.
Oh, she had it.
Okay,
Maybe it's just over. It was busy this one.
she'll be here. If she's in the building, she'll be here. All right. Cool.
12:30?
No, not really.
I would be terrible at counting out.
What's his notes? Got that one to start.
Okay. All right, it is 12:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you today for joining us for our South Texas Regional Family Medicine Grand Rounds. Our educational partners today are the South Central Area Health Education Center. Our department's mission statement is inventing a healthier future for families and communities in San Antonio, South Texas, and beyond through excellence in patient-centered care, research, and education. Today is March 5th, 2025, and today's CME code is 1009-6248. So please text attend 1009-6248 to the number on the screen to receive credit. AAFP members can use your AAFP login and claim credit for this activity at the link on the screen. This live activity, the South Texas Regional Family Medicine Grand Rounds, has been reviewed and is acceptable for up to 1 prescribed credit by the AAFP. Physicians should only claim the credit commensurate, or should claim only the credit commensurate with their extent of their participation in the activity. Our Grand Rounds address the following nationally established physician core competencies: the Institute of Medicine core competencies, the ABMS ACGME competencies, and the AAMC competencies. And Dr. Nader will introduce our speakers.
Good afternoon. So Dr. Bradley's not here, so I'm going to introduce Dr. Hazle, and I'll introduce Dr. Bradley after she arrives and is ready to speak. Dr. Madeline Hazle is a third-year family medicine resident at UT Health San Antonio and a current administrative chief resident. She's from Houston and has lived in Texas most of her life, completing both her medical school and residency training here at UT Health San Antonio. Dr. Hazle received an undergraduate degree in biology at the University of Wisconsin, where she was also a member of the varsity swim team for 4 years. Professional interests include preventive care, geriatrics, lifestyle medicine, mental health, and advocacy. Dr. Hazle will be working for Convivia Senior Primary Care in Floresville, Texas, after graduating from residency later this year.
All right. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Let me just get set up here, so I'm going to have to toggle back and forth. Okay. All right. So today I'm going to be talking to y'all about blood pressure. The title of my presentation is 24-hour ambulatory blood pressure readings, more informative for the risk of all-cause and cardiovascular mortality. So a little bit of a spoiler alert there in the title, but we're going to go through more details. I'll be analyzing one of the AFP poems. All right. So our main clinical question today: are ambulatory blood pressure readings better than clinic readings for predicting mortality? That's the main thing we're looking at. And just as a background, why is this even important? So hypertension, it's the most common chronic condition seen by family physicians. We see it all the time in our clinic every day. This condition affects 32 to 46% of US adults, with prevalence increasing with age. And it's a leading modifiable risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So treating hypertension can reduce morbidity and mortality due to CAD, MIs, heart failure, stroke, and CKD. All right, and a little bit of background information before I get into the study. So the link between elevated clinic blood pressure and reduced life expectancy has been pretty well established. And then studies have,
I'm sorry, it's just the screen.
oh, okay, we'll pause. Did they see the first view or not? Okay, we're back on track. So studies have suggested that ambulatory blood pressure provides a more comprehensive assessment of blood pressure over a 24-hour than clinic blood pressure and has been reported to better predict health outcomes. However, at least prior to this study, the evidence came from mainly like population-based studies and few relatively small clinical investigations. So studies including larger number of participants often like pooled together databases from previous small studies. So the evidence was somewhat limited. And there's a lot of uncertainty whether nighttime, daytime, or full 24 hours were blood pressure monitoring was the strongest predictor of death. And then as well, there's the implications of hypertensive phenotypes being like white coat hypertension and masked hypertension were pretty ill-defined in regards to mortality. So the study aimed to address a few of these things too. Oh. Okay, so on the left here, this is the title of the study I'll be reviewing. It was published in the Lancet in 2023, so pretty recent. And on the right here is kind of the goal of this study. So in this largest study to date, aimed to report associations between long-term usual levels of clinic and ambulatory blood pressure indices and hypertension phenotypes with total and cardiovascular death in patients in primary care practice recruited into the Spanish ambulatory blood pressure monitoring mortality study. Kind of a mouthful there. Okay, so study design, this was an observational cohort study. The clinic and ambulatory blood pressure data was obtained between March 1st, 2004 and December 31st, 2014 from the Spanish Ambulatory Blood Pressure Registry. And this was a national study of patients who were selected by their physicians at 20 primary care centers from the Spanish National Health System in all 17 regions of Spain. So pretty widespread study too. The eligible participants were 18 years and older, so only adults included in this study, and they had to meet guideline recommended indications for ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. So this included suspected white coat hypertension, refractory resistant hypertension, efficacy of the treatment, and high-risk hypertension, etc. All right. So going a little bit more into the methods. So the clinic blood pressure was measured after 5 minutes of rest while seated using standardized procedures, and they used a mean of 2 clinic readings. For the ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, or ABPM, validated devices were programmed to record blood pressure at 20-minute intervals for the day and at 30-minute intervals for the night. And they took a mean of all the valid readings for that. And so the valid readings were based on predefined quality criteria, and it included successful reporting of at least 70% of blood pressure readings during that 24 hours and also 1 valid measurement per hour. In terms of day and night periods, these were defined according to just when patients said they went to sleep and when they woke up. And then other variables were obtained with personal interview and physical examination, kind of to find out more of the participants' conditions, other variables there. All right. And so for the mortality data, the way they collected that, the date and cause of death was obtained by a computerized search of the vital registry of the Spanish National Institute of Statistics. Individuals were designated as having died if they were recorded in that registry, and the cause of death was determined from the death certificate and coded according to International Classification of Diseases. And there were certain codes that just correlated to having deaths being cardiovascular in origin. And then for each study participant, the follow-up was from the date of their recruitment to the date of death or until December 31st, 2019, whichever of those occurred first. Okay. So our study cohort, they identified almost 60,000 individuals here. They did exclude about 1% because of incomplete information. So we ended up with over 59,000 patients included in the analysis. Here are some of the main characteristics of this study cohort. So the mean age being 58.7. It was pretty even male and female, 53% male, 47% female. Mean clinic blood pressures were 148 and 86.5. And then the mean 24-hour ambulatory blood pressure, 128.8 over 76.2. The mean follow-up was almost 10 years, so pretty good follow-up there. And then a little over 7,000 of the participants died, and about 4% of those were from cardiovascular causes. Okay, this is just showing, I don't want to read all this, but it's just showing some of the characteristics of the cohort and kind of what they looked for at baseline. So it included like BMI, smoking status, diabetes, previous cardiovascular disease, and then like the number of blood pressure medications they were on at the beginning. All right, and then for their statistical analysis, they used Cox models to estimate associations between usual clinic or ambulatory blood pressure and mortality. They did adjust for confounders and additionally for alternative measures of blood pressure. And for each blood pressure, they created 5 groups defined by quintiles of that measure among those who died. And then they estimated using Cox regression hazard ratios and just telling us the risk of dying relative to different levels of blood pressure. And then they compared the top 4 groups, 4/5 to the lowest 5th. And these hazard ratios were adjusted for several different factors, including age, sex, smoking status, BMI, et cetera. Kind of like we saw on the chart before, they gathered that information at the beginning. All right. So I'm going to walk through some results. I'm going to have some charts on here, but I'm going to try to kind of break them up because they have a lot going on. Okay, so this chart is showing the association of clinic and ambulatory systolic blood pressure with all-cause death. And all-cause death is like at the top, and cardiovascular death, so that's the bottom. What I have circled here is patients where they excluded the 5th with the lowest blood pressure value. So that's on the right, the left, all patients, okay? And I've circled the hazard ratio for the confounder adjusted models in terms of all-cause death. So in this confounder adjusted model, the 24-hour systolic blood pressure was more strongly associated with all-cause death than clinic systolic. So we see the hazard ratios here, the 24-hour systolic being 1.41, greater than the clinic systolic being 1.18. Okay, and then after that, they adjusted for clinic or 24-hour blood pressure. Okay, so for the clinic systolic blood pressure, they adjusted for the 24-hour and then vice versa. So after adjustment for clinic systolic blood pressure, the 24-hour systolic blood pressure remained strongly associated with all-cause death. We see the hazard ratio there, the bottom circle, 1.43. But the association between clinic systolic blood pressure and all-cause death was attenuated when they adjusted for the 24-hour blood pressure. So that went to 1.04, went down. Okay, and then just going on the left side again, that this is just showing, oops, I didn't. Okay, again, the left side is just including all patients. So the results basically were the same if they included all patients, including the lowest 5th, with the exception of what's here, which is the clinic systolic blood pressure, which actually was inversely associated with mortality after they adjusted for the 24-hour blood pressure. But then largely between including all patients and including just the top 4/5, they were relatively similar. Okay, and then again, those were all for all-cause death at the top, and this now we're in cardiovascular death. Okay, so we see for the confounder adjusted model, hazard ratio for clinic systolic blood pressure 1.22, and for 24-hour systolic, a greater association at 1.48. And then again, when they adjusted for either the clinic or 24-hour blood pressure, the clinic systolic association went down, so that went to 1.04, but the 24-hour systolic actually became more significant. And then now I've circled here, we're looking at daytime and nighttime. Okay, so they split the 24-hour further into daytime and nighttime blood pressures. So in the confounder adjusted model, daytime and nighttime systolic blood pressure had broadly similar associations with both all-cause and cardiovascular death. And adjustment for the clinic systolic blood pressure did not really change these associations. So as you can see, for all-cause death at the top, the two circles up there, daytime systolic and nighttime systolic, were 1.38 and 1.42 in terms of their hazard ratios, and didn't change much when they adjusted. And same for cardiovascular death, hazard ratios were 1.46 and 1.5 respectively for daytime and nighttime. All right. Now, this is kind of interesting too. So after they adjusted for daytime systolic blood pressure, the nighttime systolic blood pressure remained strongly associated with all-cause death and cardiovascular death. So as you can see, for the top showing all-cause death, the hazard ratio for nighttime systolic when they adjusted for the daytime went from 1.44 to 1.45. So pretty similar, still significant, whereas the daytime went down when they adjusted for the nighttime blood pressures. And the same kind of effect was shown for cardiovascular death as well, with the nighttime systolic blood pressure hazard ratio remaining at 1.51 when they adjusted for daytime, but the daytime systolic blood pressure hazard ratio went down to 1.1 when they adjusted for nighttime. Okay, so basically they also calculated the informativeness of this information, and going off of this, the nighttime systolic blood pressure was found to be the most informative measure for all-cause and cardiovascular death. You see clinic systolic being the baseline at 100%, and nighttime systolic was like 600%. Informative. And you can see too that just the 24-hour systolic blood pressure was almost 5 times more informative than the clinic blood pressure in and of itself. Okay, so I know charts are kind of confusing for me. I like to see things in kind of graph form, more visual. So I'm basically going over the same information just in a different way. So here we have the systolic blood pressure on the left, which we'll focus on because as you can kind of already tell, the diastolic association was not as strong. And then, so the x-axis is blood pressure, y-axis is hazard ratio. This is the association between the blood pressure with all-cause death. Okay, and this is showing the confounder adjusted model. And then the colors are each representing different blood pressures. So the blue, nighttime, red is 24-hour, green is daytime, and black is clinic. So you can see systolic blood pressures here all associated with all-cause death. And then, like I was saying earlier, this is when they adjusted for either the clinic or 24-hour blood pressure. So the clinic blood pressure adjusted for 24-hour and vice versa. You can already see the black. Remember, the black is the clinic blood pressures. Those already are losing its association, whereas everything else is still correlated, right? And then we go a step further, and this is like I was talking about when we adjusted for nighttime versus daytime and vice versa, the nighttime being the blue. So you can see the blue being very strongly associated, whereas the green kind of loses that. And this is for all-cause death, okay? So these are cardiovascular death. They pretty much look the same, to be honest. So again, this is just confounder adjusted model with systolic blood pressures on the left. The colors are still the same. Okay, we're adjusting for 24-hour blood pressure, clinic blood pressure, and you see again that the black dots are the clinic blood pressure, and they're losing that association. Okay. And then again, kind of the same thing, nighttime blood pressures in blue. It's still very strongly correlated with the in terms of the hazard ratio, whereas the green is kind of losing that strength. Okay, now I'm going to go into the hypertensive phenotypes. So again, they looked at blood pressure in normal range versus white coat, masked, and sustained hypertension. I'm looking here at the last column is the confounder adjusted model. And here what we're seeing is that all-cause death was greater in patients with masked hypertension, which means they have a normal clinic blood pressure, but elevated 24 hours. So the opposite of white coat. And sustained hypertension, both of those, cardiovascular death and all-cause death actually was more likely. So they had hazard ratios of 1.24 for all-cause and 1.37, 1.38 for cardiovascular death. Okay. In this chart, I'm highlighting the white coat hypertension. So this is when they have the elevated clinic, but normal 24-hour blood pressure. And it's kind of interesting. It appeared to be that these patients were at a lower risk of all-cause death and cardiovascular death than those with normal blood pressure. Their hazard ratios were 0.9 and 0.89. However, they did also analyze the data while excluding participants with clinic diastolic pressure under 70. And basically when they did that, people with white coat hypertension had basically the same risk. So hazard ratios of 1.04 and 1.02. But as you can kind of tell there too, the confidence interval is crossing 1. So there's no real association. I was interested in this kind of reading on why this may have been the case. They mentioned that patients with normal blood pressures are not necessarily like healthy, and that ambulatory blood pressure measurements were also taken for clinical reasons. So that might explain why there was a lower risk of death relative to normotensive patients, which is supported by the idea that when they took out the diastolic blood pressure less than 70, it wasn't really significant. And so the increased risk of death at lower values of diastolic blood pressure really probably reflects reverse causation. Like as we age, you get arterial, the stiffening and subclinical disease, which are associated with widened pulse pressure and thus the lower diastolic values. So that's kind of how they explain that effect there. Okay. All right, and then here, so in this analysis too, this is again just showing where they excluded the diastolic blood pressure under 70. And basically they found the similar results for masked and sustained hypertension as they did when they just included all blood pressures. So the hazard ratios were 1.4 for all cause for both of them pretty much, and 1.59 for cardiovascular. Okay. The main finding here, again, blood pressure measures obtained through ambulatory blood pressure monitoring were more informative about the risk of all-cause death or cardiovascular death than the conventional clinic blood pressures. And then the other findings or significant findings that we saw with the data is that the nighttime systolic blood pressure was the most informative measure for both all-cause and cardiovascular death, which, this might be due to more standardized conditions at night. There's a lot of variable activity during the daytime. So they found that the nighttime was the most significant. They also found, like we talked about, that masked and sustained hypertension were also associated with increased risk of death compared to patients with a normal blood pressure. And then there was no evidence that white coat hypertension was associated with increased risk of death. So those are the main things here. this study had several strengths. It was a very large sample size. They had almost 60,000 patients, pretty long-term outcomes. They tracked them over an average of 10 years. They adjusted for many confounding factors. They took multiple types of blood pressure measurements, clinic, ambulatory. They even divided night, daytime, looked at the hypertensive phenotypes. They did a very comprehensive, statistical analysis. And they also examined both all-cause and cardiovascular mortality. And I didn't advance, but there they are, what I just said. All right. Limitations, though. So there's possibility that some of the blood pressure readings were inaccurate, and we had measurement error. It also was an observational study, so we can't necessarily prove causality, right? And so we can't really make a direct inference regarding the benefit of like basing treatment off of ambulatory blood pressure measurements. It also did not consider non-fatal events. It only looked at deaths. So if they had an MI but survived or a stroke but survived, we don't have that data. It was also a predominantly white population, so questionable on whether this is generalizable to other populations. They also only took 2 blood pressure readings in the clinic. And then something else they noted, so they tracked medications like antihypertensive at the beginning of the study, but they didn't actually have that data during the whole follow-up period. And then going back to the inclusion criteria that I mentioned at the beginning, there may have been some selection bias there. And then clinical implications, this really just goes back to the main findings that, the major point of this presentation, ambulatory blood pressure is better in terms of associating to death. Association of nighttime blood pressure with death, that highlights a need to evaluate and control nighttime blood pressures, especially in high-risk patients. And then the risk of death associated with masked hypertension, that is concerning because we don't typically detect those patients in the clinic visits. And then in terms of white coat hypertension, there doesn't seem to be association with increased risk of death. However, it's important to know that a lot of those patients will progress to sustained hypertension. Okay, and here's some of my final thoughts, just kind of tying it to our clinical practice. So really elevated clinic blood pressure readings should be prompting us to obtain blood pressure measurements outside of the clinic for diagnostic confirmation prior to starting treatment. And that is consistent with USPSTF recommendations and AFP. So ideally, all patients with high clinic blood pressure readings would be able to monitor their blood pressure at home, right? But we know that our patients have a lot of barriers. This might be practical, financially possible for our patients. And that's just getting them a cuff. Ambulatory blood pressure monitors, first of all, they're very expensive. I looked them up on Amazon. I think the cheapest one's $150. They are kind of complicated to use and set up. I imagine it's very annoying to have them going off every 30 minutes in the night, waking you up even every 20 minutes in the daytime. I don't know how practical that is for a patient to do. So whether that's possible to really do for our patients, probably not. Also, very important, this population was different than ours. So thinking about whether it's applicable to our patients, that is kind of unknown. And then going off the hypertensive phenotypes and their findings, I really was interested because I think about white coat hypertension quite a bit, but I never really think about masked hypertension. What if, they're coming and their blood pressure is normal and they're not normal at home? Should we be considering monitoring everyone's blood pressure at home? There's no, definitely guidelines don't say that, but it made me think about whether we should be checking everyone at home just to make sure we're not missing anything, especially in maybe higher risk patients with some comorbidities as well. And then going back to, we should be, getting diagnostic confirmation with outside blood pressures first is, we should really consider white coat being a possibility before treating. So that's my final slide. I'll kind of leave it if anyone has questions or like comments on this, or how you can think of ways this might apply to your clinical practice, or how you might change your clinical practice. Did you see? I don't know. I don't know what happened with that, because I know we had the loaners, and I don't know if we still have the loaners, actually. We do, okay. I haven't done them in a little bit, so I'm like, I think we still have them, and even getting them the loaner cuffs was sometimes difficult, there's criteria there, and then like, can they even work that machine properly at home? Will they come back with that data? Will they come back at all? Oh, okay. Yeah, no, and the ambulatory ones are much more complicated too. Yeah, you have to set them all up and they're expensive, yeah.
Yeah, right. Again, every morning I talk about blood pressure, kind of the reasons here. The other challenge that we have is we talk about the blood pressure a lot. We don't have very good way of measuring
Mhm.
because the technique that we are using, the cuff, is built for people like me. And many people are not like me. It means that when you have the figures, shoulder here, those are not going to sit in places. As you know, many of our images are measuring here, they're measuring the leg in the hospital, and we don't have any correlation between those readings and real blood pressure. They did a study in ICU patient population. They kind of measuring different places, having the cat in to kind of measure it. They couldn't find any good way of kind of reporting it. And at this many years back, I look at that because again, the blood pressure that we measure here, they are not correct. Most people don't know what we are talking about. And that's a big challenge because as you can say, imagine sending that patient home with it 24/7. The only other things that they take 2 reading for 10 years period.
That's what, yeah, I think it was only 2. They only took the mean of 2 clinic blood pressures, which I don't really know why they did that, but that's what from reading, they only took 2.
Yeah.
So those were definitely limited.
Everyone says it's time for Dr. Bradley.
Okay, Dr. Bradley. Thank you.
Dr. Kirsten Bradley, MD, is a passionate, dynamic family medicine physician from Dallas, Texas, with a heart for preventive care and community well-being. From her days as an LSU Tiger Girl to cheering on the Dallas Cowboys, she's always had a knack for energy, precision, and teamwork, qualities she now channels into her medical practice. With a deep commitment to empowering patients through education and holistic care, Dr. Bradley believes that prevention is the key to lifelong health. Whether she's in the clinic advocating for the underserved patients or dancing her way through a workout, she brings enthusiasm and dedication to everything she does.
Oh, I see. Okay, awesome. All right, thank you very much for the introduction. All right, everybody. So the title of my presentation today is Disciplines to Defeat Diabetes. All right, so today's main talk, I mean, we have so many talks about diabetes, and my focus today is to try to talk about how do we prevent it? How do we counsel our patients who don't have it yet? So kind of focusing more on our adolescent, pediatric, and young population today. So of course, with diabetes, what is that? And we can start having these conversations for any patient with prediabetes, which is their A1C being 5.7 or higher, or patients who have any BMI that's consistent with overweight or obese type of range. And so obviously, if they have those things, we already know to start the metformin, start the lifestyle modifications. If they have any other comorbid heart failure, kidney issues, we can consider any SGLT2 antagonist or the GLP-1 agonist. But you guys already know all that. So let's get to the good part where we talk about prevention. So first, what we need to know about our patients is what is their genetics? Where do they come from? Okay. So research is showing that any patient who has one parent who has obesity as well has a 3 to 4 times risk of also developing obesity. Then if you have both parents who are obese, that increases their risk 10 times, okay? Now, of course, we do have metabolic issues where we do have obesity that's caused by like Prader-Willi syndrome or any other type of receptor deficiencies, leptin deficiencies, thyroid disorders, all those kinds of things can lead to obesity. So the focus on that is completely different than kind of focusing on our, again, adolescent young kids who there's really no underlying reason other than us just trying to counsel different types of lifestyle modification changes. So this is just a chart showing the prevalence of obesity. This is from up to date. So this was back from 2017 to 2018, though. About 42% of patients that were non-Hispanic white had obesity in total. And then our non-Hispanic Black population, about 49% of them had obesity. And the Asian population, only 17% had obesity. And then the Hispanic population had about 44.8%. This is in Texas, and so this is from the Texas Department of State Health Services. This is, again, just kind of in the area of San Antonio where we're at 38 to 43% of prevalence of obesity. So this is just kind of a little bit more updated from 2020, just so we know what our patient population looks like. And this is the vicious cycle that we all know about. I could have rants a lot about just the situation. So limited education, redlining, all the different problems with access to food, behavioral habits in these adverse environments. And so then that causes the mental and physical health issues, which our patients then just spiral into emotional eating, and then or they're not able to go outside and walk because it's not safe. Like we know all these things in the vicious cycle. So I just wanted to put this here just for the holistic sake of recognizing that sometimes in this country, like we are a slave to food, and with different areas, of course, this is more prevalent than in others. And so what can we do? We can kind of counsel different weight management interventions. So of course, we'll start with diet and then go into exercise, different behavioral health modifications that our VHC team loves to help us out with, which we're very grateful for. And then, of course, medication management, mindful choices clinic, focusing specifically on that. And then if anything else, bariatric surgery. So behavioral modifications, I included just a little summary of a qualitative study that was done in the UK. And it actually showed that some providers don't even discuss these kinds of things with patients because either they're uncomfortable or maybe there's not enough time. But motivational interviewing shows that there is a great effect, okay? Even if it's just a quick check-in. Hey, how are you eating? How are you exercising? What could be better? That one quick question can kind of spark the things in the patient's minds to think, hey, what can I do? What can we actually try to work on during the interim time of me getting to my next follow-up appointment? So motivational interviewing helps to guide the patients in making their own realistic decisions. It allows them to use their free will to get creative and to set their own goals. And so they're likely to implement these discussed changes and have higher levels of confidence to stick with that plan because it's their own idea. Nobody likes to be told what to do all the time, you know? All right, so weight loss is 80% diet dependent. So over the last 70 years, the USDA has shown that the caloric intake in the US has increased from about 2,400 calories a day to 2,900 calories a day in the 2000s. It's a pretty big jump. So give me a little bit of time here to just show a couple of videos about food. This is just kind of food for thought of like, what are we actually eating? What is going on here? So this is my first video. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of the Food Babe. So she is, she's a woman who has made a lot of petitions to try to create real change in the food industry. She was able to enforce the ban of Red 3 February 10th of this year. And the deadline for food manufacturers to remove Red 3 from the products is January 2027. Thank you. Disclaimer, she lacks any real credentials, okay? So she doesn't have a nutritionist degree or anything like that, but you know, of course, a lot of the information is still somewhat useful just to kind of consider, hey, these changes can make a big difference. Am I able to press play?
In the US, there's 11 ingredients. In the UK, there's 3, and salt is optional. An ingredient called dimethylpolysiloxane is an ingredient preserved with formaldehyde, a neurotoxin. This is Skittles. Notice the long list of ingredient differences. 10 artificial dyes in the US version and titanium dioxide. This ingredient is banned in Europe because it can cause DNA damage. Artificial dyes are made from petroleum, and products containing these dyes require a warning label in Europe, and they have been linked to cancer and disruptions in the immune system. This on the screen back here is Gatorade. In the US, they use red 40 and caramel color. In Germany, they don't. They use carrot and sweet potatoes to color their Gatorade. This is Doritos. The US version has 3 different artificial dyes and MSG. The UK version does not. General Mills is definitely playing some tricks on us. They launched a new version of Trix just recently in Australia. It has no dyes. They even advertise that when the US version still does. This is why I became a food activist. My name is Vani Hari, and I only want one thing. I want Americans to be treated the same way as citizens in other countries by our own American companies.
All right. So again, evidence-based medicine, but again, it's still just interesting to kind of be aware of. This other guy, this is Bobby Parrish. He is a registered dietitian. And he was a Food Network champion with award-winning recipes. So he's based in Wisconsin. He graduated from there. And so he kind of does also a little bit more of informative, just public education about what is actually in our food.
Reason why they can't use the same ingredients here that they're using over. These are Cheetos from the USA, and these are Cheetos from the UK. So why, I ask you, do they look so different and have a vastly different ingredient list, even though they're made from the same? These Cheetos use 4 doses of artificial food coloring, while these use paprika and caramel coloring. And you can see how artificial colors can make a Cheeto look nuclear red. We use enriched cornmeal, which fortifies the corn with cruddy synthetic vitamins. They use whole grain corn. And while we both use monosodium glutamate, MSG, the UK version specifically calls out it's a flavor enhancer. So why is this happening? Well, certain ingredients are banned in other countries, but we allow them here, like red number 40 and yellow number 5, which, by the way, are derived from petroleum. And the UK and other countries takes food safety and food regulation much more seriously. At the end of the day, it's all about profits over people. And there's no reason why they can't use the same ingredients here that they're using over there. And if you want to see the difference between Coca-Cola in the UK, Mexico, and USA, let me know.
There we go.
In the
All right,
US,
so
there's
why is this even important? The gut microbiome, okay? So gut microbiome is correlated to the development, if it's bad, irritable bowel syndrome, colon cancer, dermatologic issues of the skin, autoimmune diseases, cardiac changes, pulmonary issues, endocrine issues, many other serious conditions. And so the environment that we're creating in the belly is what we're trying to improve in our patient population. These highly processed, not naturally digestible foods causes inflammation, and over time can create worse health conditions. So I try to educate my patients about this as simply as possible. So I have a couple more videos just to, again, have a little bit more food for thought. I only have 3 more, so I'll try to make these quick. Let's do this first. So what you're seeing right now is how donut is made. So again, we're trying to understand more about our food, right? And this next video is kind of focused more on portion control. So the first couple of videos was more so about us just understanding what is actually in our food. The next video is going to be talking about portion sizes and how we can counsel our patients to be mindful of that. Oops. So this is just a video of a new restaurant that was opening and kind of just understanding what is out there and what, like, people are actually buying this and actually eating it. And not everybody recognizes what we should or should not be putting into our bodies. You know, people see this and they're getting excited, like, oh yeah, let's try it out, right? But what is this actually doing? And yeah, it's good, right? And everything's great in moderation. Okay. All right, so this is just a chart from Up to Date that goes over the recommended portion sizes for our toddlers. So dairy should be about 2 to 3 cups a day. Protein should be about 2 to 5 ounces a day. Grain should be 2 to 5 ounces. Fruits, 1 to 1.5 cups a day. Veggies, really as many as anybody wants, and kind of just understanding that. So this photo is to see actually what the plates should look like, how much protein we're actually eating, okay? Now, whenever I try to guide my adult patients on their portion sizes. I was taught in a previous nutrition course, like the size of your protein intake should be the size of your palm, okay? And your carbs should be about the size of your fist, and you can eat as many veggies as you want to. Again, just trying to, sorry, my bad, I didn't change these, but yeah, so this is the portion sizes that should be given to children. And then these are the portion sizes for adults. And so this bottom photo here just kind of shows the expected portion sizes in America. Eating out at restaurants, it's always more. Typically, you can try to usually fit like 2 to 3 portions from one restaurant portion of a meal versus your American home meals, and then in Europe, kind of what their plates look like. So again, just kind of recognizing the difference in the portion sizes. So how can we actually counsel our patients? All right. So going over the serving sizes of what they should be, counseling that they should be eating 5 meals a day. We all get in trouble with the continuous snacking throughout the day. So breakfast, lunch, dinner with 2 snacks in between. Stop eating immediately upon feeling full. A lot of our patients also feel that just because they look at the plate and they think that they're supposed to finish it all, you don't have to. As soon as you feel that you're full, push the plate away. And these are things that are counseled in behavioral health. And again, making sure that our patients put the food away once they've made a plate, to not go back for seconds. A lot of people get in trouble with that as well. Put the food away, don't go back for seconds. Try to eat at least 2 hours prior to bedtime. 2 to 4 hours is best. And then whenever we're getting our groceries, trying to not bring all the bad food home. I also counsel patients to try to, if they can afford it, get all of their groceries from the perimeter of the grocery store. Whenever we go up and down the aisles, that's where all the processed foods are. And then no sugary drinks. And so, again, just trying to provide the dietary counseling and to try to keep it simple for my patients. I personally like to say, if it did not grow, or if it would not have grown in the Garden of Eden, don't eat it. Okay, so clean eating on a budget. Obviously, with our patient population, the price is always the barrier. So I know that there's patients who just get a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter, and that's what they eat the whole week, like peanut butter sandwiches. I had a patient yesterday who is she's homeless, living in a storage unit, and the person's storage unit that she's living in gives her cheese and bread, and that's what she's eating. So it's difficult, very, very difficult. And so just kind of understanding what our patients are what are their abilities to try to make any type of intervention on their diet. Of course, we can try our best, but in general, for our patients who maybe are able to actually afford a better diet, we can even still encourage them that it doesn't have to be expensive. So canned vegetables with less sodium are good options, or canned fruits. without added sugar are good options. Even though the cans sometimes may be cheaper, you actually get more food with the frozen meals because there's less water in those cans. So just kind of let your patients be aware of that they can maybe get frozen fruits and veggies that'll last longer, and it'll provide more food without all that water. Canned tuna, trying to use coupons, weekly ads. And then I even started to provide a YouTube. I'll get on the patient's phone if they have it, and we'll search $20 emergency grocery budget. There's a lot of good resources out there online about trying to help patients shop on a budget. And I've seen where patients can get like a whole meal prep for $20 with like black beans and etc. Okay. All right. The other thing that I love to talk to my patients about is, what are you drinking? How much sugar are you drinking? Are you drinking diabetes? Let's rethink your drink. So essentially, this can of Coke is the best example. So essentially, if you're drinking a Coke, you might as well just put that whole thing in your mouth like it's a, what are those? Pixie sticks, yes. Now, even though artificial sweetener in the diet drinks has fewer calories, so you won't necessarily gain weight, it still affects the gut microbiome. And it also still increases cravings to where you're going to want to keep drinking more and more. Okay. So I educate my patients on that too when they tell me, oh, I'm doing diet. Like, okay, that is good. You're not going to gain weight, but you're still putting your body at risk for these other things. Also, same thing with juice. Patients think that, orange juice is okay, but just in an 8-ounce glass of juice, that's essentially like 3 oranges. Would any of us eat 3 oranges at once? Maybe. But imagine whenever patients are actually getting like the big old bottle of orange juice and they're drinking all of that. That's just a lot of sugar and fruit. And then of course, like the Starbucks drinks, energy drinks, all that stuff, just a lot of sugar. So try to cut it down. I tell my patients, at least just save it for the weekends. Nothing Monday through Friday. We're all human. We gotta like it for a little bit. Okay. And then I've got one last video and then we'll move on from food. So in efforts to try to help the food in this country. So Dr. Uma Valetti is the CEO and founder of Upside Foods. He went to medical school in India and then residency in Buffalo and did 3 fellowships at the Mayo Clinic. He completed cardiology training and all of that, and he now practices cardiology and is a professor at Stanford. And so he is coming up with meat made in the lab.
The age of lab-grown meat has arrived in this country. The Agriculture Department just approved 2 California companies to sell chicken grown in steel tanks using cells that come from an animal egg or a special bank of stored cells. The cell-cultivated chicken will first be available at a restaurant in San Francisco and another one in Washington, D.C.
This is what you've called a slaughterless house.
Oh, yes, yeah.
The equipment looks like a commercial brewery, but it's not beer they're making.
So that's where it all starts, just a few cells.
It's meat.
So you're making meat in here.
Yes.
But I don't see any animals and I don't see any animal parts.
Well, that's the trick, right?
Stainless steel bioreactors or cultivators produce real meat from animal stem cells.
You're making chicken in there.
Yeah, so if you look at this is approximately a 200 plus liter tank. And we take cells from a chicken or an egg.
Dr. Uma Valetti is a cardiologist who founded Upside Foods, taking on a food chain as old as time. The potential to exponentially expand the food supply has attracted top-tier investors like Bill Gates, Richard Branson, and Whole Foods founder John Mackey. President Biden is also on board, signing an executive order to support cultivating alternative food sources.
So just food for thought. All of this stuff is happening. Okay. All right. So moving on to physical activity. So AHA recommends that 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise or 75 minutes of vigorous aerobic activity and at least 2 days of weight training per week. So just trying to get an understanding of what do our patients actually like? What do they do? Do they do nothing? What can you do? And so I like to also kind of counsel with them with questions. What do you have, or who do you have to be your support team? I kind of go down the who, what, where, when, why. Who do you have to work out with? Who can be an accountability partner? what is your mobility like? What can you actually do? Are you able to actually go to the gym, or do we need to get you into some chair yoga or get you some 5-pound dumbbells at the house, or, you know, something like that, just to be doing on the couch? Chair exercises as well. And again, I counsel my patients, they can always look these things up online. And I try to do it with them in the room, just that way they can see it, okay? Where can you go? Do you have access to a gym? Do you have a park that's nearby that's safe that you can go to? Just so they can kind of think about where they can actually go to work out. Why would this be important for you? How would this actually make an impact on your life? And how could you get this started? So again, behavioral health can kind of help with these things as well. And we can prescribe exercise. So we can refer patients to TDI so that they can get access to the gym. We can write letters of medical necessity so patients can start to pay for these using their FSA or HSA if they have their job benefits. To cover this. Also, patients with Medicaid, there's something called One Pass where they can get access to a lot of different gyms that will cover the payment for this. Same thing with Medicare. There's the Silver Sneakers or the Renew Active fitness programs where we can prescribe this stuff and it can get paid for. This is just what the Silver Sneakers website looks like. And the patients can check for their eligibility. Oh, so sorry. Thank you. Yeah, so again here, just kind of understanding the role of exercise, what can you actually do? And then these are the questions to try to assess where the patients are. And then these are the prescriptions that we can actually put in place. And this is what the website looks like. Thank you. Sorry. All right, and then other things to kind of focus on when it comes to lifestyle modifications is how is their sleep? They're not sleeping, they're not metabolizing, they're not burning calories in their sleep. So kind of going over that, this is a slide that focuses on just treatment of insomnia. The dual orexin receptor antagonists, trazodone or gabapentin at lower doses are approved and are of course better than the benzos. And then there's the non-benzo medications as well. But trying to kind of counsel patients to improve their sleep habits. Smoking cessation, of course, we can counsel our patients on that, trying to get them to quit smoking, because that just kind of, you know, if they're trying to quit smoking, maybe then they're picking up other food eating habits. So just trying to help them with that. Stress management, you know, everybody kind of reacts to stress in different ways. Some people will binge eat, some people will starve. It all just depends. But just kind of understanding where the patients are at mentally, and then we can try to focus on, okay, what can you do physically, and to make some changes to the food as well. And then alcohol consumption. Alcohol obviously, again, leads to the weight gain because of the carbs that we're drinking on top of junk food that people eat afterwards. Okay. These are different research studies on diabetes prevention. So this first study is just showing how the Mediterranean diet, even without weight loss, will actually reduce the diabetes incidence. Okay, so as long as they're eating better, even if they're not losing weight, it will reduce their incidence of diabetes. The second study showed that low-fat diet without weight loss does not prevent diabetes. So no, low fat is not good enough. Okay, the next study showed that combined aerobic and weight training exercise has the greatest reduction in diabetes risk, of course. And next study is talking about medication intervention. So metformin is less effective than metformin is better than compared to just regular exercise and diet. So if we add metformin, it actually is more effective to help the patients reduce their risk of developing diabetes. And then also in our patients who have those comorbid conditions of heart failure, kidney disease, adding on a SGLT2 or a GLP-1 can also be beneficial. For our patients that are willing to start doing injections for the GLP-1 agonist, we can always prescribe the semaglutide, tirzepatide. And individuals who don't want to start those medications, we could always recommend the phentermine topiramate. I know sometimes it's not necessarily covered with insurance, so it's just trying to figure out what can the patient actually afford. And then the last resort is the bariatric surgery, unless that's something that a patient would prefer to do sooner. And that can always be done. And patients who got bariatric surgery had a 5% amount of those patients that developed diabetes versus the patients who did not get bariatric surgery. 19% of them developed diabetes. So bariatric surgery is helpful to prevent diabetes. All right. And so this is the community and support system. So go through the grieving stages with the patients. Hey, this is very frustrating, but what can we actually do to get you going? Kind of figuring out what those community resources are. And the hardest part is always getting started. So having that frequent follow-up for the patients to kind of come in so we can continue to help them. I always try to take the burden off of the patients and connect with them and let them understand, hey, it's not necessarily your fault. There's a lot of other things happening that are out of our control, but what are some of the things that we can do together to control? Okay. Yeah, so that's everything that I have about preventing diabetes. Any questions? Any questions?
What questions for Dr. Hazle? Final up this.
Yeah. Yay. Yay. I'm glad. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you very much.